So who is the scariest person you have ever met? Let's find out. Story 1. When I was first sent to prison in 2006, I was locked up with Mitchell Overhand. We just called him Spike though. Back in 1988, when he was 16, he shot both his parents. He didn't think his mom was dying fast enough, so he bashed her head in with a hammer to finish the job. Then buried them in the backyard and threw a party. Scariest thing about Spike was how intelligent he was. When you talked to him, he was always cool and collected, very mindful of everything he said and did. Anytime we talked though, all I could think about was the monstrous things he was capable of. Story 2. I had a neighbor. He was attacked physically, mentally by his parents. He was an absolute nightmare to live around. He had absolutely no sense of right and wrong, and loved to hurt people, an honest-to-God sadist. Not that he didn't come by it honestly. He was absolutely tormented. That being said, you might call the better part of our friendship normal. We did normal stuff. Watched movies, played football, played Sega Genesis. But sometimes you'd just rub him the wrong way and he'd snap. I told him his mom was really loud when she yelled one time, and he walked away like he was mad. I didn't think much of it. I was walking back inside, and then all of a sudden I'm on the ground bleeding all over the place. He threw a rather large rock at my head and busted it open, basically. I had to go to the hospital for stitches. I told my mom that it was an accident. He got weirder. He liked to talk me and his sister into doing weird things while he'd just watch, and if I tried to stop he'd tell me to keep going or threaten to beat me up. Keep in mind we were young. Guy shot birds, squirrels, etc. with his BB gun, would keep the carcasses on his back porch, and I'm pretty sure messed around with them. The strangest thing I ever saw him do, I was on my porch with him, and he asked if I wanted to see something cool. I said sure. We walked across the street to a neighbor's house, and he jumped on the car hood and just started kicking in the windshield. It wouldn't bust, so he went to the neighbor's back porch and found a garden hoe and just destroyed this guy's car. The guy wasn't home, but a ton of people saw him do it. I jetted the moment he came back with a garden hoe. The cops came to his house. I guess the guy pressed charges. I think he was around 12 at the time. He had to go through all kinds of legal stuff for it. But they made him take the ride downtown and everything, and I remember so clearly looking out my window and seeing him going from his porch to the back of the cop car, just screaming his head off. My name is Drew and my life sucks. My name is Drew and my life sucks, just screaming it over and over. Even in the cop car he was screaming as they rolled down the street. The last time I saw him was at a party senior year. He was beyond wasted, and he was a few years out of high school. As stated in the last post about him, he ended himself a few years ago. Very sad kid, but very scary as well. Story 3. I had a classmate in 2nd grade who had no fucking emotions. His name was Carl. He was like an empty vessel. One day for show, until he brought in a cat's skull and told the class it was his family's cat Peter. It smelled terrible, and the teacher flipped out and sent him to the office. Didn't see him for a few days. When he returned, he spent all day every day staring the teacher down. One day he took his pen up to the desk and attacked her in the leg. He was immediately expelled. Never thought I'd see him again. Senior year in high school we get a new kid. It's Carl. He's back. He didn't hang out with anyone. Stayed by himself during lunch. This girl Patty that I was talking to, trying to bang, kept getting followed home by him every day and would wait outside her house, across the street, for hours, studying and taking pictures of her house. I started walking her home every day, and he would always be there. So one day I asked what his problem was. He just said you, and walked away. That night he broke into Patty's house, but like a shithead didn't think to check if anyone was home. So Patty's dad stopped him almost immediately and called the cops. They found a ton of weird drugs and weapons on him, and like surgical equipment in his backpack. Never saw him again. Story 4. The person I'm living with, I work with her, and when I was about to be homeless, she said I could rent out her spare bedroom. The first week I'm there, she decides to tell me about how she is fascinated with serial killers, and that she studied them heavily in college. I'm 21, she is 32. I didn't know what to say, so I just said sounds interesting. Then 2 months into me living here, me and her were both crazy drunk, and she told me she's always wanted to harm someone. She added that she daydreams about it on the regular. When she told me that, I told her that I never want to annoy her. She laughed and said, I wouldn't tell you this shit if I didn't trust you completely. The next day I asked her if she remembered what we'd talked about, and she said the night was a complete blank for her. Let's just say I'm in a weird place in my life at the moment. Story 5. This post is very long, but I couldn't tell the whole story very well without it being this long. When I was a missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. Turns out he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford. He had to have been in his late 50s to 60s. It was hard to tell because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He feigns interest in what we were peddling and asks for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but is clearly more excited to be speaking English with two Americans. We meet up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road or some other public but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leader for the local unit about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we bring him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly know who we are talking about and caution us to stay away from this guy. Apparently he's a bit unstable, and once or twice a year will start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I can't believe that the bishop is referring to the same person, and we continue meeting with him. I don't know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy. Between his disheveled appearance, flat-out lying to us, and other small signs, he had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put our finger on, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally he would run into us right outside of the house we lived in. One night, after talking about his house in the jungle and how nice and wonderful it was out there, he agrees to have us meet him at the side of the road in front of his house, so he can guide us down the path to his house. The time arrives and we are waiting patiently by the side of the road, but Bickford is very late. Just as we are about to leave, he arrives and takes us down the path into the jungle. At this time, it's very dark, and we are walking through waist-high foliage. This area had roads and cities, but was right next to a large reservoir, and if you left the main roads, could become very isolated and overgrown very quickly. As we walked down this path for what seemed like forever, I kept walking into spiderwebs with my face and almost losing my shit. I hate spiders, and the ones in Brazil were the stuff of nightmares. Luckily, I carried a small LED flashlight, but it seemed woefully underpowered out there in the jungle. When we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we couldn't believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing, where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said welcome home and led us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame, no door, and saw that all furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He begins showing us the main room inside the front door. That's when I noticed them. Notes. In chalk. On every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, on the ceiling, in a tiny frenzied scrawl. When I trained my light on the notes and started to read them, stuff then got real. Most of the notes were variations on Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop. I did it again. These with a month and date written next to them, and the piece de resistance, the names of several children with their ages and graphic detail about them. We tried so hard to not mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small talk questions about the rotting food on the stove, or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement, anything but mentioning the notes. I can't speak for my companion, but I was freaking the F out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at DEFCON 1 as well, and we decided to get the hell out of there. We made some excuse as it was getting late, that we needed to get home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back, on the condition that we would come visit again. As we get out of the house, he suddenly remembers that he knows a shortcut, and tells us to follow him. The direction he's trying to lead us is clearly not the way back to the road. It only led deeper into the jungle. We politely decline, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I did not give a crap about the spiders. When we got back onto the road and realized we were safe, we looked at each other, as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we just saw, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me, nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound. I was so scared. My companion called our leaders, who called their leaders, and we ended up moving about a week later, but not before making an entry in our area book, the book that stays in the area, listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. I realize the entire ordeal sounds completely cliché. Everything about Bickford did. That's why after our second conversation with him, I started recording every time we would meet with my digital camera. I would set it on audio record mode and stick it in my pocket. I'll edit this post with a link once I've uploaded the audio from that night. Story 6. Sophomore year in high school, I was over at my English classmate's house for a group project. I knew her parents had some issues in the past, notably her father who was unstable. Anyway, when it comes time for us to leave, I forgot my book inside her house, so I ran back inside to get it. It was on the coffee table in front of her dad, who had this blank, glazed look on his face. It was creepy, so I grabbed the book and went back out to the car. A few weeks later, her dad ended up attacking and finishing her mom and himself. Story 7. The scariest person is someone who I don't even know. While I was back in college, I had the opportunity to fly out to Kansas City to see a friend for a weekend. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I really needed a break, so I obliged the invitation. I arrived at around 9 p.m. I knew nothing about the city, and he didn't have a car or cell phone because of how close his apartment was to campus. He walked to pick me up from the bus station where I got off from the airport. We went back to his apartment. We started the night off talking and drinking. It was a blast. The time went on, and it quickly became 3 a.m. We noticed the time just as there came a loud knock on the door. Did someone just knock on the door with a piece of metal? I asked my friend. I think so, but let me go check. Suddenly and roaring loud we hear from the door a man calling in a deep and guttural voice, "Candy. Free candy." He continued to knock. "Open the door and come out for some free candy." My friend approached the peephole quietly and peered through. He turned around with color slowly draining from his face. He mouthed me the words, "We're going to die." He slithered to the floor and wormed his way back to where I was squatting behind the couch. Together we made our way to the back of the apartment and hid in a closet. The knocking continued. I asked him what he had seen. He must be at least 6.5 feet tall. He is black, ripped, and wearing a do-rag, and has a double-barreled shotgun. His reply carried the emotions of being half amazed and shocked at what he was saying. We shat bricks while waiting for the door to come down in splinters. The knocking continued to get louder and louder. We could feel the pounding from the door in the floor where we were hiding. There was no phone to call for help, no car to run to out of the window. We were on the 4th floor with no access to the stairwell. There was nowhere for us to go. After about 15 or so minutes, the knocking stopped. We no longer heard anyone yelling and offering free candy. We waited for another half hour or so before coming out and looking back into the hallway. He was gone. The next morning I went out and rented a car. My friend went and bought a cell phone. We made a police report, but they never followed up on it. Scary stuff. Story 8. Maybe not exactly scary, but I can see how girls might think it is. Throwaway because it was a small school and pretty specific incident. In high school, there was this teacher who was well known among us as kind of a creep toward pretty girls. One day, when teaching bacteria or something to his advanced students, he finishes the main PowerPoint and then brings up another one with just 5 slides. The slides are all pictures of infected men's bits. People are grossed out. He tells us to grow up. Well, a few months later, he has this extra credit opportunity that he offers to a few randomly chosen girls. Details unimportant, but they will end up wet and will need to change after. The classroom had a closet which is roomy enough that he's made a path of towels the soaking wet girls can follow to go change. At the end of the experiment, one of the girls signals to another to come help her with something. Turns out they found a camera, angled in front of a mirror that he'd set up in the closet, and they watched enough of the tape to see that it perfectly filmed them drying off and changing. No one calls the cops for several days, and when they finally do, his hard drive is clean and he passes a lie detector test. What's so bad is that he reportedly explained to one of his classes earlier in the year how you can cheat a lie detector test, and he was close friends with the local police. Scary to think of how many years he'd been pulling stuff like that and what he got away with. Story 9. I was doing research in the rainforest of Madagascar on top of a mountain, living in tents with a group of absolutely insane scientists and students, who happened to be some of my best friends. I was studying insects, but we had primatologists, herpetologists, botanists, cultural anthropologists, and loads of other specialists there as well, not to mention about a dozen Malagasy technicians and guides. The site was so remote it was about 20 kilometers from the nearest paved road, and took us about 12 hours on foot to reach it, due to the mountainous terrain. I remember one day in camp a pair of guys showed up we'd never met before. They were muscular as hell, not too uncommon for Malagasy farmers, and wore faded basketball jerseys. They wore Stetsons, which I thought was odd. Oh, and they also carried huge swords. Naturally, we were all a bit taken aback, since we had no way of defending ourselves, and we'd been in the country for months with no incidents of violence or intimidation. Normally, when a Malagasy person meets you, they shake your hand, they smile, and they say salama. Not following that ritual, particularly in the countryside, is tantamount to insult. They walked right into camp with no smiles, no handshakes, and complete silence. They sat at our table and stared at my research leader and started talking with no build-up at all. We had one of our technicians translate for us. Our Malagasy was pretty weak. These guys called themselves Zama, Black Magic Guardians, and claimed that they had black magic powers. Apparently, they were crime fighters, protecting the local villages in the valley from bandits. They claimed that they could transport themselves anywhere within 2 minutes, and that they were impervious to bullets. The first Zama then said that if we didn't pay him 600,000 Ariri, about $300, a tremendous sum of money for that region, we would be attacked by bandits and they would not save us. We all figured it was a shakedown, meant to prey on locals who believed in regional religious practices, which included a belief in black magic. Or more practically, people who feared that the Zama and the bandits were in league together, collecting protection money from poor farmers. Our research leader knew he couldn't afford that money, so he instead offered them infinite free hot meals, which he could write off on his grants, and amazingly they accepted, provided we give them some headlamps and a pair of rain boots each. They showed up a few days later, proudly wearing their gifts and all smiles. They ate a load of rice, gave us a bottle of moonshine from the leader of their village, and went on their way. Weird guys. Eventually I left camp and came back to the US, but my research leader emailed me out of the blue one day to tell me that the Zama actually caught a bandit trying to steal from the market 2 or 3 villages over. They beat him up, cuffed him with rope, and dragged him to the nearest town. Stuff was insane. Story 10. I was clerking for the Constitutional Appellate Court of Uganda when I came face to face with a murderer of their own 10-year-old child. The facts of the case chilled my blood, and I saw a lot of very disturbing cases during my time there. The convicted was a mentally ill mother of several small children, one of whom, a 10-year-old, ditched school one day. When his mother came home and found the child not in school, she tied him to a tree and began beating him. She then took banana leaves and stuffed his shirt and pants full of them. Banana leaves are highly flammable. Then she piled leaves around him. She torched her own child and stood there watching him burn. The child's uncle approached the scene at this moment and ran toward the child, attempting to free him of the ropes and put the fire out. The mother began beating the uncle and pushing the child back against the tree and the pile of leaves as he continued to be engulfed in flames. Unfortunately, by the time the uncle freed the child and put out the fire, the kid was so badly burned, he passed before medical treatment could be given. She appeared in court the day I saw her in her prison uniform, hair unkempt, eyes wide and bloodshot. This was several years after the murder. She stood during the hearing, which took little more than an hour, and looked around at the lawyers and judges as they recited the facts of her son's murder. I of course can't be sure of what was going on in her head during that time, but I believe that I saw a look of satisfaction on her face and a dark rage, as if had her hands been unbound, she would reach out and strike the nearest person. She seemed not to react at all when the court upheld her death sentence. I remember feeling very unclean and sick after the hearing was over. Story 11. I didn't realize how scary this guy was until afterward. I was at a concert, and this guy was standing nearby. I was a bit drunk and turned to talk to a friend and bumped this guy's backpack. He glowered at me menacingly, so put my hand up and said something hilarious like, "Sorry bud, backpack attacked me." Fast forward a bit, and a couple drinks, and someone bumps me into the guy again while dancing/moving around during the music. He turns around and glowers again. I said, "Hey man, you're in the front row at a rock show wearing a backpack. People are going to bump you. Gonna have to deal with it." He looked me right in the eye, slapped my shoulder, and did a little friendly shake thing, then said, "Don't sweat it, man." So I say, "Cool, cheers bro," fairly sarcastically. He turns around, but a guy that was with him turns kind of pale and looks at me for a minute before turning around too. 20 minutes later my friend who was playing comes over to me and says, I should stay away from that guy because he's one of the biggest drag dealers in the area and he's not averse to or inexperienced in extreme violence and murder. He said, "I thought he was going to stab you when he turned around." I steered clear, but I kind of brushed it off as I don't live in an extremely scary area, so the biggest fish in S small pond is still a small fish. That all changed when I looked up his extensive and brutal criminal record online, and a few news stories that named him as an arrested party. I was quite glad to have only the holes I was born with, and to be alive. I saw him at another concert a few weeks later, and he gave me the nod. I nodded back and drank very, very little that night. Story 12. One summer I worked at a camp which was located in a pretty isolated area. One of the people who worked at the camp, I think in maintenance, was a kind of loner type who I guess at some point in the summer developed an interest in me. I was about 19, and he had to have been at least 40. I thought he was harmless at first, and would kind of hang around me a bit, try to chat me up, etc. I figured it was normal coworker stuff until one night he invited me to have a drink with him. Another older guy I worked with pulled me aside and warned me to not let myself be alone with the maintenance guy. I figured he meant that the maintenance guy was planning on putting moves on me. I cannot tell you how clueless I was at that age, and was too embarrassed to ask for details, so I just decided to take his advice and keep my distance. I wasn't rude, but I just didn't stop and chat with him as I had before. Soon after, the maintenance guy came by my cabin late one night. I was sitting in the dark outside of my cabin, just enjoying the evening when I see him come out of the woods. He couldn't see me in the dark, but my cabin's porch light was on, so I could see him. And I watched him slowly and silently circle all around my cabin, peering into all the knotholes/spaces between the boards and around the edges of the window coverings. It was bizarre for obvious reasons, but also because he had always been really friendly and light-hearted around me. But that night I saw him in a different light. He looked dead serious, trying to make no noise, and had this intense look on his face that gave me the shivers. It did not look like it was the first time he had done that. I said something like, "Hey there, buddy, are you looking for me?" He jumped, and instantly he dropped the creepy face and turned back into the nice and friendly version of him I'd seen all summer. He told me he had been following a deer he thought he had seen in the woods and quickly left. I just remember being creeped out because I felt like I had caught the real him, what he was like when he thought no one was looking, and it did not look nice. After that, I moved to a cabin closer to other people and stayed well the hell away from that guy. I found out years later that not long after that incident, he had attacked a girl to death in those woods. So, I think he was pretty scary. Story 13. It was a guy who I fitted hearing aids up with. He would constantly tell me about the voices and sounds that he hears in his head, but that it was okay, because he was speaking to a psychiatrist about it. It was just the way he kept looking at me with those eyes saying, "They're back again." He did that several times throughout the appointment, but the worst has to be when he followed that up by saying, "Want to say hello to them?" It really scared the shit out of me, and I flagged his patient profile for others to just be aware of him. Story 14. I'm from a small farming town, and in the second grade a new kid moved in, Brady. Because we were seated in alphabetical order, I had to sit next to him. I realized there was something not quite right with him. He was a pathological liar, and not just about small things, about everything. He and I both went to morning latchkey, and in the third grade, he just stopped coming one day and switched classes, as well as getting an assigned seat on the school bus route we both shared. When I was a teenager, I was talking to my dad and wondered aloud why Brady had gotten kicked out of latchkey that year, and I finally found out why. Turns out he had snuck up behind me and choked me out until I passed out, and I had blocked out the whole incident. He also snuck a stapler and a pack of staples out of school one day, sat behind me on the bus, and tried to force staples into my head. Thankfully, he was really small for his age and wasn't strong enough, and I'm a girl with very thick hair that was up in a ponytail, offering some protection. In high school, he continued with the lying and moved on to drug dealing. I'm 25 now and have no idea what he's up to, but I think I would still go into a cold panic if I ever saw him again. Story 15. I was in the psych ward and they brought in a new patient in restraints and locked us all in one of the rooms in the unit. We could get out, but no one could get in without a key. One of the other patients sneaked a look at his file, and he was a violent schizophrenic there because he was threatening to murder people. Just a note I feel like I have to make. He was definitely in the minority as a violent schizophrenic. Most people with schizophrenia I met were great people, and even most of the ones there for homicidal ideation were very upset by those thoughts and didn't want to act on them. We heard lots of yelling and banging, and at one point, when we were watching from the windows of a side room, he ran into the main room followed by a bunch of staff and started throwing around all the tables. He actually calmed down to the point where they let him walk around the room, and while I was just as terrified as the rest of the patients at first, once I saw him the fear vanished. He was a large, muscular, middle-aged man, but he was also nearly crying because he thought there were bugs crawling all over him, and he couldn't get them off. He actually seemed very scared. He was only there a few days before they decided that having him there wasn't worth the risk and inconvenience it posed to the other patients. Every time he would freak out again, we would have to go sit in one of the locked rooms for a while. But in between his violent episodes, he would talk to me and dance to 80s music. He liked the other patients. It was the staff he had problems with, and he even taught me how to play blackjack one evening. Once he accidentally walked in on me in the bathroom, no locks on the bathroom doors, and he was so embarrassed I thought he was going to cry, and he apologized to me over and over. At first that was the most scared I've ever been of a person, but he kind of made me see the violently mentally ill in a different light. It would be really tough to have a family member with that kind of problem. He definitely didn't need to be out in public with his violent tendencies, but I don't think he was a bad person either, just very sick. Story 16. Me. It was Oktoberfest in Okinawa, Japan, and the Sapporo Beer Festival was on. Lots of good German/Japanese food, good beer, good times. It was getting late, and I'd been drinking soda for the last 2 hours, so I started heading back for the car. It was sort of a long way, and the winding stone path went through several bushes, almost like a maze, except no real walls. It was dark, and I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings other than to keep walking toward the parking lot. And that's when I noticed the Japanese lady in front of me is speed walking and looking over her shoulder at the big, scary American guy. She cut onto a different path, which is a better path to the parking lot, and I took the same path. She looked over her shoulder, saw me and gave a shriek and started running. I really had no clue. I seriously looked behind me to see what she was running from. When I figured it out, I felt so guilty. So I waited a moment, then continued on to the parking lot. I couldn't see her anymore, and figured that was a good thing. When I walked up to my car, I suddenly heard a gasp and looked up to see she had parked right next to me. She was there, frozen, with her keys in her hands and looking at me with her mouth open. So I jogged away from the parking lot, out into a grassy area about 60 feet away, then turned and sat down on the grass, near a park light, so she could see me. She unfroze, got in the car, and got out of there fast. I think she might have even chirped her tires. I felt bad about that. Story 17. So this one time at school, this guy in like the highest year 11, walks past me and just spat chewing gum into my face completely unprovoked. That didn't make him scary to me, but it's relevant. A couple of years later, when he had left and I was in year 10, I was walking home and crossed a road and nearly got hit by a car that broke the traffic lights. So being a teenager as I stuck my finger up to the car. The car then turns around in the next turning and just sits there as I cross the road in front of it, revving the engine. It was the guy who spat chewing gum in my face. He sneers at me. I sneer back but carry on walking. He pulls out and drives past me. Glad that's over, I'm thinking. Nope. Get to the next corner and see that he's driven ahead down the road and dropped off his passenger, a near 7-foot thug well known to local law enforcement for various reasons, directly between me and my house. My salvation was a second route that takes much longer, but took me subtly behind the thug and the dick in the car without being seen. Crapping bricks the whole way home. Decide that for the next few days I'm taking the longest, most obscure route home that I can. The next day I'm sitting at home alone and look out the window. Just as I do, this guy pulls up outside my house. Holy crap, I am so gonna die. Peer out the window to see him looking around at each of the houses. He didn't know which was mine. Death averted. I've never been so scared in my life. I've only seen him once since then, and fortunately I'd been through puberty by that point and was unrecognizable to him. So acted as though I didn't know who he was and he bought it, thank F. I don't like confrontation. Because I'm small. Story 18. In my rural neighborhood, there were these two brothers. One was my older sister's age, the other a bit younger, maybe 4 years older than me. I'll refer to him John. John was a sociopath. All the kids younger than John were afraid of him. He was pale and had a piercing, menacing stare. One day as he was exiting the school bus, he smashed my head into the wall of the bus, knocking me momentarily unconscious. I was 10 years old, if I recall correctly. John got sent to juvenile detention for that, so no one saw him for a few years. When he returned to the public school system, he was still in high school and I was in junior high. He no longer rode my bus route, so thankfully I could easily avoid him. He was back at school for probably about half a semester, when one morning a story quickly spread that he had assaulted another little kid on his bus. Within moments of the first bell, the city police were on the scene, and most of us got to see John escorted to the office. As the story goes, John was searched for a weapon, and an empty hypodermic needle was found in his boot, along with a little blood. He had stabbed an 8-year-old in the neck with the needle, just for kicks. He was arrested and went back to juvenile detention, this time until he was 18. I saw him just once more in my life. I was driving deliveries for my summer job, and he had moved in with some relatives in the same town in which I worked. He was out skateboarding, still pale, with an unkempt burgeoning beard. When I played GTA 5, I imagined a grown-up John to pretty much be Trevor. Story 19. A couple months after my mother passed away, I was put into a teen psych ward because I was suicidal. Within about 12 hours of being committed, I realized my life wasn't so bad and I needed to buck up. However, I was in there with some severely psychologically disturbed teenagers. That was scary just in general, especially when you have to be locked in your room at night because of the danger. One evening, I am sitting in the dining room with a girl who I thought was nice. I knew she was schizophrenic and had both auditory and visual hallucinations, but seemed relatively normal. We were chatting and suddenly her eyes went black. She had blue eyes. The whole iris turned from a bright blue to a deep blue/black. Then she started slamming her head onto the table. I didn't know what the fuck to do. She pulls her head up, looks at me, and says, "There are angels and demons around all of us. They watch us. They watch us." Then she grabbed my wrist, started shaking my arm, and said in a weird voice, "Your angel is Laura. Your demon has no name. He bites me. Make him stop." Then she started slamming her head against the table. By that time the nurses and aides came in and took her to the literal, padded room to chill out. My mother's name is Laura. She had died a few months beforehand. I decided I was scared shitless of that girl. The day I was released from the psych ward, she slipped me a note and all it said was Laura. It was terrible. Story 20. Old cafe customer, we nicknamed him Lurch. He was about mid-30s, long scraggly heavy metal hair, ripped jeans, leather jacket, dirty t-shirt, tall skinny. No weird tattoos or 666 on his forehead. That guy is still the scariest person I have ever encountered. To put it in perspective, I have been attacked and spit on by a crazy-ass homeless dude with boils on his face, and he didn't scare me as much as this guy did. He would come in every day for a cup of drip coffee, and would just sit and stare at our 16-year-old female barista. All questions were answered with a dirty look, a grunt, and or some mumbled phrase like, "Someone should teach you a lesson." That last one was said to me after I confronted him about his obsession with my coworker. It doesn't sound like much on the surface, just some loser dressing like he's going to a Poison concert circa 1988, but this man had the worst energy I've ever encountered. I've been in customer service for years, lived in some less than nice neighborhoods. I have met gang members and straight-up killers who I've actually liked and trusted. This guy sticks out because he would just raise the hair on the back of my neck when he walked in the door. The deadest black eyes I have ever seen. When you feel safer around an admitted murderer than someone, that's some shit. Our manager wouldn't let us ban him, so we took precautions. One of us would always make sure to see our youngest employee to her car. Many a night we would come out, and he'd be in his Dodge Dart with 12 different colors of paint just hanging in the parking lot. Waiting. We pooled our money and got a taser for the shop. We talked about getting a gun from someone's cousin. Finally, one of my other co-workers told her BF, and he and some of his less than savory cousins caught this guy outside and talked to him. We never saw him again, and for that I am thankful. Story 21. There are people that I have been physically afraid of and emotionally afraid of, but the most startlingly scary person I have ever met is currently 12 years old. He is a kid I used to teach at my martial arts school. He quit almost a year ago. He is small and anemic, and he weighed 64 pounds at age 11. But I am almost positive he's a psychopath. He's very intelligent and extremely good at lying. It's especially disturbing because you can see him learning how to be a better manipulator because he's not quite gotten the idea, yet, that he should hide some of his manipulations. For example, this one time some of us were standing around before demo team practice. He was walking by an older teen, about 18 years old, who was practicing with nunchucks. As he walked by, he turned to the older kid and said, "You hit me." The older kid said, "No, I didn't. I would have felt it." He said, "Oh yeah, And it's hard to describe, but you could see in his eyes that he was filing that information carefully away so that he could refine his lying skills. He would lie about things that didn't even matter, seemingly just to practice. As a group, the instructors have come together, and we've worked out some of his more sinister manipulations and lies. Things he's done have shown that he doesn't really consider other people as entities with feelings, and that he has delusions of grandeur. It's doubly scary because the other kids his age, and older kids, and even adults who don't know him that well, think he's great. He was easily the most popular and beloved student by all the other kids in the school by a long shot. It's hard to know what to do about it. I guess since he's gone, he's not my problem anymore. Story 22. My RA in my residence loves sharing this story of the scariest person he's met. During the summers, my RA, we will call him Trevor, is a tree cutter in BC. Around the time of this story, there was apparently a serial killer on the loose. I'm from Alberta, I don't know all the details. But this killer would go into towns and pick up prostitutes and lot lizards, take them to his trailer, and attack them. Again, I don't know the full details. So one night Trevor and his coworker are coming back from a job, and his coworker tells Trevor that he has to piss. Trevor says he has to go as well, so they pull the truck over to the side of the gravel road and get out. It's pitch black outside, and once the two find a good spot to do their business separate from each other, Trevor suddenly hears footsteps midstream, and he yells, "Hey, you're done already?" "That was quick." The coworker yells back, "I'm still going, dude." Trevor hears more footsteps, only the pace has quickened. He shouts out into the darkness, "Who's there?" No reply, the footsteps have stopped. The two finish their business and get back into the truck and head down the road. About 5 to 10 minutes later, Trevor notices a glowing in the trees. Curious as to what it may be, they stop to check it out. They realize that it is the reflection of their head lights off of another truck's license plate in the middle of some pretty dense trees. As they walk towards it, they realize that there is a camper/trailer parked right beside it. Someone had been obviously staying here for a while, and it's a logging area, so you aren't supposed to be camped out in the area. Trevor decides it would be a great idea to throw rocks at Slash around the trailer and see if anyone is in there. He starts chucking rocks and shouting, "Hey, who's in there?" over and over. Suddenly, after about a minute, a figure suddenly appears in the headlights of Trevor's truck. It's a man. Trevor starts yelling at him now, "Hey, who are you? What's your name? Why are you here?" The man doesn't answer. It is in that moment that Trevor realizes the man has something in his hand. A 2-1/2-foot long meat hook, like the kind you use for hoisting up cow carcasses. The man is still silent, and deadpan expression is fixed on Trevor and his co-worker. Trevor keeps yelling, "Who are you?" The man begins walking slowly, then quickly, like a businessman on the way to a meeting, not quite running. Just walking with a purpose. Trevor and his co-worker run to their truck, just as the man is about a few feet away, and they speed off into the night. They don't know who he was, and they never told the cops.